Welcome to this week's episode of Stranger Stitches, where I light small fires in the dark corners of crime and history. I sprinkle in just enough sweet tea and southern charm to keep it all very civilized. This story is from public sources and not intended as a news article. We just sitting out here on the porch telling tales like folks do, and I'll probably work on my crochet if y'all don't mind. So, pick your poison, sit that shapely ass down and buckle up, Buttercup. Today we're taking a look into the case of Elisa Lam. She was a 21-year-old Canadian student who disappeared on January 31st, 2013, while staying at the Cecil Hotel. Now it's called the Stay on Main in Los Angeles. She was last seen alive in that now infamous elevator surveillance video that's been watched millions of times. For nearly 3 weeks, nobody knew what the hell happened to her. The guests at the hotel had started bitching about their showers, low water pressure, nasty brown water that tasted like ass, and a smell that could knock you over. On the morning of February 19th, 2013, a maintenance worker climbed up to the rooftop to try to figure out what was going on. He popped open the lid of one of those 4 massive 1,000-gallon tanks, and he found something very haunting. Elisa Lam's partially decomposed body was floating face up in the water, her clothes drifting beside her like some B-movie ghost story. This discovery ended the 19-day search for Elisa, but it was just the beginning of one of the internet's most obsessed over mysteries. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office ultimately ruled Lam's death accidental drowning with bipolar disorder, identified as a significant contributing factor. Now, things get complicated. The official story hangs everything on Lam's mental struggles, and honestly, there's some heavy stuff to unpack here. Her diagnosis and medication. Well, she had bipolar disorder and depression, and that's a lot to deal with when you're 21, and that comes with challenges of its own. She was on a whole cocktail of medications: bupropion, lamotrigine, quetiapine, dextroamphetamine, and venlafaxine. That's 5 different drugs trying to keep her brain chemistry balanced. And it gets sketchy as hell. The toxicology reports showed that she hadn't been taking her antipsychotic recently, and her mood stabilizer and another antidepressant, they were barely detectable, like she'd been under-medicated or had stopped taking them altogether. Here's the thing. She had been in that water for nearly 3 weeks, if you agree with all of the findings, which means those toxicology results are about as reliable as your last Tinder match. Here's what really fucks with this theory. Her medications were found among her belongings in her room. Each pill bottle was a little fuller than it should have been if she'd been taking them as prescribed. So either she'd been deliberately skipping doses, which fits the theory of going off her meds on her own, or someone wanted it to look that way. Had she been held captive somewhere and didn't have access to her meds? Now that's a $1,000,000 question. But if someone was keeping her somewhere, why would they leave her medication bottles in her room just to make it look like she wasn't taking them? Is some sort of mind fuck somebody's playing, or they just didn't know? That seems like an awfully convenient detail for a kidnapper to think of, unless they were trying to set up the perfect cover story, make it look like she had some sort of psychotic break and wandered off on her own. You know, mentally ill people with brain chemistry problems, make very easy targets because they can always blame something else. And it all kind of gets swept under the rug. Like, she had a mental break and threw herself into a water tank. Well, that's just an opinion, so I'll leave it there. And the timing is crucial, too, because experts note that there's a very strong risk of mania associated with taking the antidepressants alone in her case. Without the mood stabilizers, it's like taking the brakes off a car and then wondering why it crashes. Her behavior had everyone scratching their heads. Before she vanished, Elisa Lam was moved from her shared room because her roommates, quote, were freaked the hell out by her and her odd behavior, end quote. She was leaving cryptic notes saying, go home and go away. Imagine finding that shit under your door, but it gets weirder. She wasn't just leaving these notes around. She was placing paranoid handwritten messages directly on her roommates' beds. She even demanded a password just to enter the room. Girl, it wasn't even your room. This was supposed to be a shared space, like a hostel type situation, a dormitory type thing. That's why it was cheap. Some sources say it could be as low as $8 a night, depending on the occupancy. But I guess if you're traveling on a budget and don't mind a shared space, that's the way to go. She was locking her roommates out of their own freaking room and making them beg for entry like it was some sort of secret club. Well, things got a little weirder. She had to be escorted off the set of Conan O'Brien's taping in Burbank for being disruptive. Now, what kind of behavior can get you kicked out of a comedy show taping? According to reports, she'd written a long, rambling letter and was demanding that it be given to the host. Security guards deemed her a danger to other audience members. Let's noodle that out for a minute. Her behavior was so erratic that trained security professionals thought she posed a threat to the room full of strangers that were just there to watch a comedy. And this is unsettling. She was also spotted in the Cecil's lobby announcing to anyone that would listen, and I don't imagine anyone wanted to hear it, but there she was. She was announcing that she was crazy, just standing there in the middle of the marble lobby, telling random people about her mental state. Hotel manager Amy Price, however, failed to mention that detail, but it did come out later. Katie Orphan from the Last Bookstore, that's a shop that was right near the hotel, described Elisa as outgoing, very lively, very friendly, and that was on the last day that we think she was alive, which sounds nice until you realize that extreme cheerfulness can be the upswing of a manic episode. People in the throes of mania often appear incredibly upbeat and sociable right before the downswing, and shit goes to hell. Her own family said her behavior in the elevator was normal for her when she was having an episode. Now, let's sit with that for a second. What we're seeing in the footage, the erratic movements, the apparent conversation with invisible people, the paranoid gestures, that was just a regular Tuesday for Elisa when she was off her meds. So what all was going on in that elevator video? That has launched 1,000 conspiracy theories. 4 minutes of grainy footage that's been analyzed billions of times. Well, here's what the experts say. A body language expert watched this frame by frame and concluded that there was no indication of fear. Instead, they saw some element of play. Her wide arm movements that looked like she's being mischievous. She was smiling. Though the video quality is garbage, it suggested that she was relaxed and playful. Another said her hand gestures described her as showing low sincerity or higher anxiety. How can your hand gestures be insincere? But I leave that to the experts. Or maybe she was rehearsing a conversation she planned to have. You ever catch yourself doing that, practicing arguments? Yeah, going through a conversation you need to have in your head? Well, yeah, it could have been something like that. The medical explanation? Psychomotor agitation. Basically, when mania makes your body move in weird and restless ways. Your brain's firing on all cylinders and your body just can't keep up. And that elevator door staying open forever. Did she keep hitting the hold door button? The Cecil elevators were known for their unreliability. And all of this looks creepy as hell on camera. Well, the conspiracy crowd went wild. Of course, people immediately jumped to the worst conclusions. Some thought she was trying to escape from someone pursuing her, playing hide and seek with a killer. I don't think so. I think if she had been in a good state of mind, or even if she felt like someone was watching her or chasing her, would she have gotten that elevator and stayed there with the door open? Or would she have closed that door and got out of there as quick as she could? Would she have bothered with the elevator at all? Or would she just have headed for a stairway? I don't know. But playing peekaboo with someone chasing you, it just doesn't sound like a reasonable move. Some sources did say that they thought she was high as a kite on ecstasy or some other party drugs, but the toxicology, unreliable as it was after weeks in the water, didn't support that theory for common street drugs. Well, then came all this tinfoil hat stuff. Claims say the video was tampered with before it was released, timestamps obscured, footage slowed down, and nearly a minute allegedly removed to protect someone's identity, because apparently the LAPD moonlights as film editors. Well, let's think about that for a skinny minute. Why would you tamper with the evidence? Are they protecting some high-profile person who happened to be staying the night at the frickin' Cecil Hotel? Well, if it was a high-profile person, they're not staying there with any good reason. There is no reason for somebody of any importance to be staying at an $8 a night hostel. But again, that's just my opinion. Well, could be that they were covering up their own incompetence. Can't solve the case, so let's just edit out the inconvenient parts and, get away with the stuff that makes us look stupid.
Bupropion,
Of course, we're assured by
lamotrigine,
authorities that there's
quetiapine,
absolutely no
dextroamphetamine,
connection.
and venlafaxine.
And I do agree with them that that's kind of a stretch. I'm just letting y'all know what was out there. But they're doing it like nothing to see here. Move along, folks. But what if Elisa had been infected with something she caught wandering around the neighborhood in Skid Row? What if her erratic behavior wasn't just bipolar disorder, but symptoms of another kind of illness? Yeah, it was said that she was physically healthy, but this illness might have been kind of something they didn't want to publicize. Why cut off that tourist dollar? Think about it. Tuberculosis outbreak in the area. A young tourist gets sick and starts acting crazy, then conveniently dies in a way that makes it look like a mental health crisis. Perfect cover-up, if you ask me. Blame it on her psychiatric history, case closed, and nobody has to explain why. Yeah, I just think I stepped off the deep end a little bit, but the timing is just too convenient to ignore. I heard the Cecil Hotel once called Where Hope Goes to Die. This hotel's been a magnet for tragedy since 1927. Serial killers like Richard Ramirez and Jack Unterweger both called it home. Murderers, suicides, overdoses. This place has seen as much death as a battlefield. Some people genuinely believe that the place is cursed or that somehow it attracts dark energy. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. He was there and he stayed on the 14th floor, paying about $14 a night. Ooh, he got one of them high-rise rooms. He liked to scare, torture, torment, kill, and assault these women. On at least one occasion, he had actually removed someone's eyes as trophies. And then after committing some of the most brutal murders that happened in Southern California, he would come back to the Cecil. Ramirez would return back home after doing his deed and ditch his blood-soaked clothes in the dumpster out back and then walk through the lobby, either naked or maybe in his underwear. Just a typical Friday night at that hotel. Jack Unterweger, also known as the Vienna Woods Killer, in 1991, 41-year-old Austrian journalist named Jack Unterweger checked into the Cecil while he worked on a story about crime in L.A. for an Austrian magazine. Unterweger used his reporting to secure ride-alongs with the LAPD vice cops, and those trips were revealed later on as to be scouting missions, when it was later discovered that Unterweger was also a serial killer with a penchant for strangling the working girls. During the 5 weeks he spent in downtown, he brought 3 of these ladies back: Shannon Exley, Irene Rodriguez, and Peggy Booth. They were brought back to his room, where he abused and strangled them. After killing the women, he managed to spirit them bodies out of the building unseen. If y'all are into numerology, this might be an interesting thing for you. It's called the Death Witch number, room 514. Lam was moved into 514, and in Chinese culture, that is her family's heritage. 514 sounds like Wu Yao Si, which translates to I want to die. Coincidence? Probably. Creepy as hell? Absolutely. Aquarius and the water bearer. Her death occurred during Aquarius season, the zodiac sign symbolized by the water bearer. She died in water. The universe has a very twisted sense of humor. But here's a darker thought. What if she didn't actually die in the tank? Think about it. If someone drowned her in a bathtub? Yeah. Still water, right? Still water in the lungs. Whether it happened in a hotel room or on the rooftop. Medical examiner still has no way to know. The water bearer connection becomes even more sinister if you think someone else is involved. Then there was the graffiti, and this cuts pretty deep. Someone found graffiti near the water tanks that read, Fecto cunt her soma, roughly translating, in fact, she was a cunt. This is coincidentally connected to one of Lam's Tumblr posts about how men use that word to demean women while simultaneously valuing only that part of the anatomy. The graffiti was dated 2012, and that was just a bit before her stay. That's freaking eerie to me. Pablo Vergara. And when the internet sleuths just go a little bit too far, what I want to present you with in my stories is a lot of possibilities, and they're just out there for your consideration. But when some people start pointing fingers and making accusations, that's too much. So, Pablo Vergara was a Mexican death metal musician named Morbid, and he got dragged into this nightmare because he stayed at the hotel in 2012, way before Elisa. And he made music videos about death and drowning. Those were his themes. Web sleuth destroyed this man's life with false accusations, harassment, and threats. He had even attempted suicide because of it. This shows just how dangerous amateur detective work can be. When people decide correlation equals causation, y'all pump the brakes a minute. That dude wasn't even there. Here's a couple more things that happened. The rape kit that never was. The autopsy reported subcutaneous pooling of blood in Lam's anal area. Naturally, people suspected an assault. A pathologist explained it could have been a result of the decomposition, but the rape kit was reportedly never processed. Yeah, they did it, but they didn't process it because witnesses said she'd been alone and that she had no alcohol in her system. That's messed up. That is messed the fuck up. Only a drunk woman ever gets assaulted? What's up with that? But after weeks underwater, would that evidence even have been viable? And the witnesses who were never named. Yet witnesses never lie or get anything wrong, right? Only drunk women get assaulted. Give me a break. That's just pure stupidity. And there's the ghost phone and the zombie Tumblr. Her phone vanished completely and was never found, but her Tumblr kept posting after her death. Well, the explanation, Tumblr's queue has a feature that lets you schedule posts in advance. But where the hell was her phone? Did it sink to the bottom of the tank? Did someone take it? Surely they would have drained that tank and looked for anything else. But the way this case went, I'm not sure that ever happened. And what about these roommates? The ones who complained that she's being weird. The roommates have vanished from the story. Everyone talks about her odd behavior towards her roommates, But where the hell were these people? There's no interviews, no statements, and no names. In a case this public, the silence is deafening. What if one of the roommates or the group of roommates got frustrated with her, locked her up somewhere? You know, could happen. Just saying. It's just weird to me that their statements are missing. Now, noodle this out with me for a minute. These are the last people who interacted with Elisa before she disappeared. They supposedly complained about her leaving creepy notes, demanding passwords, and acting paranoid. These would have been crucial witnesses in any investigation. But poof, gone like a fart in a whirlwind. Were they paid off, threatened? Did they simply refuse to cooperate? Or is there something more sinister at play? In an age where everyone wants their 15 minutes of fame, especially in a case that went this viral worldwide, it's incredibly suspicious that these roommates never came forward. And there were not too many anonymous reports either, so I doubt if we ever heard much from them. Hotel manager Amy Price mentioned them in interviews, but conveniently never provided any names or contact information. The police reports reference their complaints, but don't include any statements. Yeah, it's weird that they would show up in just the bylines. It's like these people existed long enough to establish Elisa was acting crazy and then poof. Or let's think about the other side of that coin. Were there ever any roommates at all? Was this something that whoever was telling this story needed to cook up to substantiate Elisa's behavior? There have been a lot of notable deaths there at the Cecil, including the 1964 assault and murder of a telephone operator, and at least 3 suicides, all of them jumpers, one of whom landed on a pedestrian, killing him too. A local woman, known around the area as Goldie Osgood, was found dead in her room, ransacked. Her room was torn apart. No idea what that was about. There was the wire-tangled death. In 1937, Grace E. Magro fell from the hotel's, well, they say she fell, from the hotel's 9th-story window, but her fall was broken by telephone wires that became wrapped around her body like some kind of spider web. She survived the initial fall, but died later in the hospital. Whether she jumped or fell was never really determined. Those telephone wires might have saved her temporarily, but they couldn't have saved her life. The double death. Did I mention this? I don't remember if I mentioned it or not. This was the worst one. 1962, 27-year-old Pauline Otten jumped from the 9th floor after fighting with her husband. Her body landed on 65-year-old George Giannini, who was just walking down the sidewalk minding his own business. Both died instantly. The last thing she did while she was alive was commit a murder. With this much death and violence concentrated in one building, believers argue that the Cecil has become a supernatural hotspot where negative energy accumulates and does not dissipate. Have y'all heard of the elevator game? Well, the elevator game theory. Some have linked Elisa's death actions to the elevator game, a ritual purportedly involving specific button sequences to access another dimension or summon spirits. I'm just reporting what I'm reading. Here's how this creepy-ass game supposedly works. You need to find a building that is at least 10 floors and ride the elevator alone. When you press specific sequence of floor buttons, 4th, 2nd, 6th, 2nd, 10, and then you get off on the 5th step. When you press the 10th floor, a woman will enter the elevator, and you're supposed to ignore her completely, no matter what she says or does. The eerie part? Players report the elevator doors staying open for unusually long periods of time, just like in Elisa's video. strange behavior from the elevator itself, and the feeling of being watched or followed by unseen entities. Did Elisa have enough belief in this that she was actually going along with it? If the elevator goes up to the 10th floor instead of down, you're supposed to have entered another dimension. The game requires pressing buttons in that particular order and behaving in ways that eerily mirror what Elisa did in that footage. The repetitive button pressing, the waiting, the apparent interaction with someone who wasn't there. Yeah, if she believed it, it was true to her. The Black Dahlia connection. Rumors still swirling around that Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, frequented the hotel in the days before her gruesome murder. If true, this adds another layer of supernatural significance to the building's dark history, and I promise you the Black Dahlia will get her own episode. She deserves it. There's a lack of clear explanation. The fact that she was found supposedly locked in a water tank, I'm talking about Elisa, sorry, in the hotel with no apparent way in or out adds to the mystery that fuels speculations about foul play. Or, if you're buying into it, supernatural intervention. How does someone just materialize inside a water tank? Well, no one really knows. For believers in the paranormal, the Cecil isn't just a place where bad things happen. It's where a bad thing is created. It is said that it is a place that actively attracts darkness and feeds on human suffering. In their view, Elisa Lam became just the latest victim of whatever malevolent force calls the Cecil home. And you can change the name, you can give it a facelift and whatever, but, polishing a turd is still a turd. So I'm going to start trying to wrap this up a little bit. What we're left with: the death of Elisa Lam is a perfect storm of mental illness and the internet's hunger for mystery. The official story, accidental drowning during a manic episode, makes medical sense when you factor in the toxicology results were compromised by weeks of decomp. It don't make all the way sense. The timeline could certainly be off. While a full autopsy could still be performed, the accuracy of determining the cause and manner of death could be significantly affected by the decomp. Decomp rates also vary with the water's pH, and that was never reported, but typically bodies submerged for that long show advanced signs of decay. This can obscure and destroy evidence, making it hard to determine. The drowning diagnosis, the traditional signs of drowning like frothy fluid in the airways, can be obscured or absent. Time of death estimation, figuring out exactly when someone died, is a real bitch, especially when they've been marinating in a water tank for weeks. Forensic methods like bone proteins are showing promise, but let's be honest, after 3 weeks underwater, we're working with severely compromised evidence. And here's why toxicology gets fucked up in water. There's a thing about testing drugs in a body that have been floating around. It's complicated, while some post-mortem changes can completely skew the results or make it look like when someone was taking drugs when they didn't. Careful analysis can sometimes give us information, sometimes not. Well, the rate of decomp, water temperatures, currents, we're talking about out in open water with the currents, or maybe when the water drains out of the tank, things got moved around. I guess that's a possibility. Did you know your body can make its own booze? This is where it gets real kind of weird. Microbial activity in waterlogged bodies can actually produce alcohol, making it look like someone had been drinking when they hadn't touched a drop. Drugs don't stay put. Some drugs are pretty stable, but others basically dissolve out of the body and into the surrounding water. What the results were from testing that water, I don't know. And yeah, that water's not exactly pristine. And now here's how they try to figure it out. Blood, eye fluid, and pee. These are the usual suspects for testing, but after weeks in water, no dice. And yes, there is usually a hair sample test, but again, once after a while in the water, you can mark that off the list as well. New research. Well, some scientists are working on identifying specific markers in tissues, like the bone proteins and stuff. So it is promising, but still experimental. Bottom line, reliability is questionable. Determining exact drug concentrations after prolonged submersion is sketchy at best. The interpretation of everything. Forensic pathologists have carefully weighed in the results, considering how long the body was in the water and the condition it was in. Major limitations. Some changes after death can make it look like drug use happened when it didn't. And some drugs completely go away. So when we say Elisa's toxicology results showed she wasn't taking her medication properly, take that with a grain of salt. Yeah, the size of a freaking boulder. Sure, let's base the entire theory on drug tests from a body that was in questionable shape when they got it. Maybe even as much as 3 weeks. But that's totally how science works, right? Maybe she'd been alive for days after she had last been seen, and I'm wondering about those roommates. Had they pissed off enough to do something to her? Maybe the drugs just dissolved in nasty tank water. Maybe her body chemistry went haywire. Hard to say. But let's let the scientific uncertainty get in the way of a nice, neat conclusion, right? Let's excuse those inconvenient details and blame it all on her mental health, right? Case closed. Nothing to see here. Move along, folks. That's all a bit too convenient for my liking. Because if you have mental challenges, nothing else can happen to you that's not your fault, right? Oh, my goodness. Well, if I hear anything else, y'all will be the first to know. But I can leave that here for now. Sweet dreams. I'll see y'all next time.